Every day there's a new AI influencer who started 6 months ago telling you how to build your career. But this man has been building AI systems for over 40 years. He's delivered solutions to Airbus, Disney, and dozens of other companies. So I interviewed him directly about how you can build a long-term, high-paying AI career that survives every hype cycle. And his answers will surprise you because we barely talked about code or technology. If you want to learn the real secrets to a successful AI engineer, don't skip any part of this interview and watch it completely. Let's get into it. Well, I mean, thanks for making the time today, Dennis. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of start by also making everyone aware how I even know you as an author, because I don't
Yeah.
know you that well personally, but your books were part of my foundation as a student as well. Because back
Wow, that's
in, what
nice.
was it, like 2018, I especially read the Artificial Intelligence by Example book. And I cannot really quote too much of it anymore because at this point it's been like a decade almost, time flies by fast. But it was one of the first resources that made AI click a little bit better for me, especially as I was learning Python at that point and I had to learn both the fundamentals of Python as well as all the AI context, right? And that is just quite difficult.
Well,
Um,
thanks for sharing that.
yeah, but it really helped me get started, and now I've grown to senior engineer doing all the work for companies like GitHub, and I really just wanted to have this conversation with you as a way of also maybe paying towards the next generation of engineers.
Sure.
So that's kind of the focus of the interview, if you will.
Okay. Whatever you want.
Yeah, sure thing. So for me, of course, we'll be covering some of the topics that are relevant to your latest book, which actually I have here as well. Not sure if you noticed it, but we've got it. So just wanted to share that. Yeah, I've had a read, and it's been quite good. I like that it's not just about the technical aspects, but there's also an explicit section around business impact and return on investment,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Which I think is really important, and is something that a lot of engineers, miss out on because they just focus on the code. But if you're building a complex AI solution that doesn't solve a business problem, then you're gonna get in trouble, right?
Well, you need the money to live.
Yeah. My focus on today's conversation is to understand, especially as you have decades worth of experience, what your views also are on the real foundational skills that you need to outlast the AI hype. Because we both know and at this moment, the AI hype is definitely, at a peak point. And once the current hype cycle, dies down a little bit, the question is, how can those who are genuinely interested in AI still thrive when we might be going into an AI winter someday, right? And I think you've experienced some of those phases where it was a little bit more lonely, maybe. So I'm kind of curious how you handled those moments in years when AI wasn't so much at the forefront of the industry.
Yeah, of course. When I started out in the 1980s, I was quickly alone because there was an AI winter coming very quickly. But I was very lucky because I registered a patent in 1982. I registered another one in 1986. The first one was in coding, and the second one was already conversational with robots. So I was very lucky to enter both aerospatial that became Airbus and LVMH on the other side. So I could do in the 1990s, I had many corporate projects in AI. I just didn't call it AI. I would just say
Right.
it's automatic. You can do it manually or automatically. But I've been doing AI all my life, in fact, because I've always been self-employed. And then when the boom came in 2015, well, then I was very lucky because I was ready for the boom. So I got a massive amount of what at my level of corporations like Euro Disney and Air France and a lot of companies like that.
Yeah, because you're saying that you've been lucky, but at the same time, I think in like the 80s and 90s, you're working on embeddings, for example, right? And embeddings are still relevant in today's AI world. So on the one hand, yeah, maybe you're lucky about this boom, but at the same time, you did prepare yourself with these real foundational skills that will probably still be relevant 30 years from now, right?
Okay, so yeah, what were the foundational skills that got me all the way through these decades? Well, the first one is not has nothing to do with information technology.
Oh,
Uh, Nothing at all. If you want some surprises, you'll get some.
yeah, exactly.
So my background was several Sorbonne universities, and I was working on cognitive science. How does a human being think? That was the first thing I did when I was a student. We created a language school with my future wife, and we were more interested in how the people were learning than what they were learning. Why were they so slow? Why did they forget the vocabulary? Why did they remember the grammar? Why did they drift? You don't need an AI to drift. Why would the student drift when we're speaking? You happen to reply on a subject and he drifts to another subject. So we would spend evenings analyzing that to improve our teaching skills. And then little by little, I developed a statistical method. I would say, oh, how many grammar rules did he learn? Which phonemes are creating problems? So then I encoded all that mathematically and created statistics. And then I went deep and deep and deep and deep and deep inside the way human beings think. So that's where I got my basics. I was lucky again because when I say lucky is because people were interested. Like I had many top managers. I worked mostly, let's say I worked 99% of my life with CEOs, shareholders, and the top
Mm.
five. I never had to go, I would go below to understand in the factories, but those were the people I worked with. So they said, well, that's interesting the way you think. Let's see how it works in my factory or my company. And we would go back to the basics. And then I wrote these basics, all these basics down as a consultant. And at one point I said, why don't I'm tired of repeating the same thing to these managers. I'm going to create an engine.
But to me, I feel like the fact that you had this intuition of, okay, I'm repeating the same sort of training material or coaching like 10 times and I want to build a system around it. I think that's kind of what an engineer does, right? Like that's really an attitude as well, because there are plenty of people who will be totally fine with doing the consulting work and repeating themselves for 30 years. Like that's their entire career. So,
Yeah, that's perceptive because I don't want to repeat myself. That
yeah,
is
yeah,
one
yeah.
thing in my life is no repetition. That's
Right.
why I didn't go to work for a company. And every year I wanted to do something else in AI. I never did the same thing 2 years in a row.
By the way, if you want a clear roadmap for building these kinds of future-proof skills, I put together a free guide called the Future-Proof AI Engineer Roadmap, and you can check it out in the link in the description. All right, back to the interview. Having some idea of cognitive science is great as a foundational layer, and I think that when you look at a lot of patterns that people are getting into now with large language models, understanding that really all they do is just predict the next token or word, if you're unfamiliar with tokens, it's just something that is not necessarily intelligent on its own. Like there's just a lot of discussions around if we're getting close to, general AI, but I think you also recognize that we're not there at all because something like a large language model, it just predicts tokens, right? And I think that this is how you can differentiate yourself between someone who just hypes up AI versus someone who knows what they're talking about. Because if you know that large language models just generate the next likely token, and you compare that to how our brains are likely to work, which are much more analog, then you can already understand there the differences and why it's not necessarily true intelligence. I think this is very interesting because one of the topics I wanted to talk about, because I read the book on the multi-agent systems, and there's a really big difference between some of the ways that you put it in the book versus, for example, tutorials on YouTube, like you're saying, social media, right? Like people having these 10-minute tutorials on building AI agents, and then someone might follow that tutorial, deploy it, and then it breaks in production, or for a company, it doesn't actually solve their issue. So what are they missing that isn't in those tutorials, and how can that maybe align with what you're saying now, where they just need to actually
Well, let
just
me give
take a
you
pen
a
and paper?
real life example.
Sure.
Okay. I can even give you two or three of them, which I literally destroyed my competition.
Wow.
Okay. There's this big garment company, a very well-known brand in France. And I had done a lot of these language courses, and I'd begun working with aerospatial that was becoming Airbus and all that. And the top manager says, we need something to optimize our fabric. We're consuming too much resources.
Right.
I'm in the 1980s. Okay. And I said, I don't know anything about your job. Nothing. I don't even understand the vocabulary you're using to express your problem.
Right.
Okay, so listen, he said, listen, you worked for Aerospatial, right? And we know the project you did, very complex. Don't tell me you can't do it for us because we really need it. The person
Mhm.
that's doing all these calculations is going to retire next year and we're stuck. So he said, I'll tell you how I'll motivate you. here is a big amount of money. So he put it on, so he wrote a check of a big amount of money for me, which was a big amount, and he put it on the table. And he said, "Here, take it, keep it. I want the system to work in 3 months, or just give me my money back." I said, "Wow, okay." So he gave me enough money. So then what I did, and this is the trick, which for your audience, I didn't know anything. So what did I do? I went into the factory.
Like physically, just right in there.
Physically,
Yeah.
physically in the factory. And first I went and bought a lot of big pieces of paper. And I spent every day after my work around 4 or 5 o'clock, I would go to the factory because they were working 24 hours a day, 24
Mm.
7. And I just go around with my big thing and look how they worked. Okay, how does it work? And the names of the machines, their vocabulary. Then I said, it's not enough. I wanted to try a machine. So people would let me during the night, use a machine. So I would cut the fabric and I would roll the fabric. And I said, I'm getting. So then I learned two or three things. I'll just sum them up.
Sure.
Like you can't cut the whole width. There you have to leave a little margin.
Mm.
This doesn't interest engineers at all. They're going to write these algorithms. That doesn't interest them. When I found there's a link you can't exceed with certain types of fabric. Some fabric you can't go too far because it creates a problem. Then there's another problem, is the way they're dyed, the dyeing process with the colors.
Yeah,
You can't
right.
mix everything up. So I learned these few, I would say around 10 parameters that were real life parameters.
Mm.
And then I went back and I said, now I'm going to write the algorithm that that plans all their system automatically, where you don't even need a user anymore. Okay,
Right, right.
just you need a user to change those parameters. So around 3 months, I had the program back on the table. I invented an al. I always invent all my algorithms, so I don't. I try. I try the usual, but the usual are I'm not going to say they're stupid, but they don't work in practical life. They
Right.
don't work.
This is a real
Uh,
case. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surviving here. I don't have. I look in books. I say, okay, that's nice, but that's the way I'm going to do it. So I did it, and it was delivered. And they said, "Who's going to use your system?" Because it looks very complex.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is interesting because no one at the engineer level understood it. The managers didn't understood it. In fact, all the white collars understood nothing. That means that if the white collars had built that system, it wouldn't work, right? You get that?
Yeah, but the
Clear?
actual people in the factory would probably understand what you built.
Right. So I said, I'm going to go into the factory
Hmm.
and I'm going to go get a person that understands what I'm saying because that's where I came from.
But I think
And
this
I,
is very fascinating for the following reason, because I see a lot of these people popping up saying, "Oh, we can use AI to automate everything," and it's like their
yeah,
step one is to just begin with a technical implementation. But how are you supposed to implement something when you don't deeply know the thing you're trying to automate? And you're
yeah,
coming
of
in now
course.
saying very structurally, well, actually talk to the people whose process you're trying to automate, deeply understand their problems and their process, and only then get started with the technical implementation,
Yeah,
because
and
how can you automate
then you can
something you
go
don't
back. Then
understand?
you can go back to what I did behind you, the context engine, and you
Right.
could put all that in RAG. You
Yeah.
can
At
load.
that point, you can. Yeah.
I couldn't do that in those days, but today I would load all the everything they say in RAG.
Yep.
I would put up in the knowledge part, and then they put all the instructions they used in the workshop in the instructions part, the context part of the system, which means that now I have a repository of the company. Even before I use AI, the whole system is built in the RAG system, both the knowledge and what we need to do. Then it becomes very easy to use generative AI. So what happened is 3 months after I delivered it,
Yep.
and it provoked a very strong reaction.
But that's
Said,
crazy, right? So I think that the common thread there is that as an engineer, like, you need to do what in the past was maybe the role of something like a project or a product manager. You need to be the one to go into that factory or to understand the process you're trying to automate, because just having
and
the coding skills is not enough
that's your
anymore.
ticket to the future,
Right.
to be an SME. not to call the SME, say, I'm the SME.
Yeah, just
Where's your
subject matter
SME?
expert, right? Just the
I'm the
acronym.
SME of the tech side. And why is this important? Because it's more or less a Japanese approach. The Japanese work like that.
All
If
right.
you look at Toyota, the way they built all these things, all these theories, Toyota. So what happened is you become the SME. So this is your ticket to the future. So just remember, I'm not going beyond the Pinecone or any vector store yet. I just say I put all the information there and all the
Yeah.
instructions. But what happened? I sold it to every single major luxury company in France. At one
Great.
point,
Yeah.
no one in France was wearing something that I hadn't planned or hadn't worked on, and probably including you today,
That
because
could very well be. Yeah.
the brand still exists.
Yeah.
Okay, the jeans, Levi's, and all these companies exist. So at one point you're saying, well, Dennis, you need an SME for this project. Why would I do that? I just delivered 50 luxury companies. As an SME, I know more than your local SME in your business. But he
Right.
only
Right.
worked in your company and maybe two companies. I've worked in 50 of these. And you can't do better. You can't, no one, what is going to tell me? Okay, go get them. And
So what
minutes.
would maybe be your advice to someone who's maybe like a junior to media engineer who's only coding right now and wants to follow this subject matter expert system that you have? What would be the first thing they can do tomorrow to just get started with
The
this? Because
first thing would be to find a domain which requires a lot of automation.
hmm
Like I found the apparel business, the cutting part. And then in aerospace, I found maintenance.
yeah,
I ended up at one point with thousands of airplanes do maintenance only for their own airplanes. They do all kinds of airplanes. Then I went to Dassault, and then I went to other corporations that did maintenance. So at one point, I became a maintenance. So maintenance is something. For example, you take maintenance. Everyone needs maintenance. Even AI systems need maintenance and
yeah, no, for
support.
sure, yeah,
I'm not talking about support because they can replace it. Maintenance. So I focused on that. So I would say, since the coder is going to be replaced at one point, directly or indirectly, because if I had 10 coders today, I know that in 2 years there'll only be two left.
yeah,
Okay, so what about the 8 others? Become SMEs in a topic and fill your vector store up with information about how it works and instructions. Do this, do that, do this, do that. Instead of writing prompts, just create them in that vector store so that you have a fantastic data set that's already worth millions. Because if you do like 20 companies and you have that, you don't even need generative AI yet. Okay, you're saying, look,
right.
I've all this experience. I can just do a little SQL query, get it out, or I can use generative AI just to embed a question and retrieve it. I don't need to generate a response. I just want to get the information.
Yeah, I
Like
guess
that's
the information retrieval part is already like that's my experience been is super valuable for companies already,
of
right?
course, of course. I explained that. I remember, I wrote the first book on transformers. I don't know if you know that.
Mm,
I
that's
wrote it
what
in 2020
2020,
on
2020.
GPT-3, and you had Hugging Face that was writing a book, but they couldn't write. They didn't have GPT-3. I had
Mm,
access. I had access to GPT-3, but they didn't because they're open source. So in January 2021, I published the first book on transformers, which of course brought me a lot of sales during the subsequent years. But at one point, OpenAI called me, one of the departments that were trying to see what they're going to do with GPT. And we
right,
had
right,
this
right.
video call like today. It was almost the exact conversation.
Oh, right.
There's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the exact conversation. They're saying, but what do you do with it? And what are you doing with embeddings? Because you're overusing embeddings, and retrieval and embeddings. I didn't even need a vector store at that time. It created a file system with vectors, and I explained it's already
Sure.
a
Yeah.
valuable resource for corporations, for warehouses to see the trends, and then you can apply. I can retrieve it, and I was applying k-means clustering on the results, and
Exactly. Yeah.
all kinds of machine learning algorithms before generation. So I would say someone that today is stuck and going to be replaced should be an SME in one topic like maintenance. Maintenance, you're not going to replace that many people because in maintenance you need the physical engine, need the people with screwdrivers and stuff like that.
Right.
Even
Physical engineering, right? Yeah.
you're not. So I would say look for a domain that where you don't hurt people. That's
I
important.
think that's a very good one. Yeah.
That's how I got all my business because people say, "Oh, Dennis, but how many people are we going to fire?" I said, "Zero."
But that's an interesting one because now I wonder, we've talked a bit about the pre-phase of figuring out how to become an SME, then you build a technical solution, but now we're talking also a little bit about how the business determines the return on investment.
Yeah.
Because indeed with this what you're saying, that's a very clear one, right? Oh, if we can fire X people, we save Y money. So what would your approach be to create an AI solution that indeed doesn't necessarily replace people, but has proven business impact that you can actually show to a business because that's something you focus on, right?
Here's how I can give you a very big example.
Yeah, sure.
And I went to Belgium, and it was it's rather I can't tell you exactly what I was doing, but I managed to save 1% of their yearly world consumption with an algorithm of what they were purchasing, which is very expensive. So we're talking millions and millions and millions and millions and millions. And there were 5 people doing the work manually, but I could beat them every time. So they said, wow, we want your solution. We want the solution. And I said, what about those 5 people? Well, we don't need them anymore. I say, yes, you do. They say, why? Because it's going to cost you more not to purchase my solution than to just go try to find someone else. Because
I think this is a very rare thing that I'm hearing because most people would just not care and just be like, okay, sure, I'll just
no, no, no,
sign
no,
whatever
no, no, no,
contracts. I
no,
think
no. What I'm
that's,
telling you is fundamental. It's so
yeah,
fundamental.
wow.
It's one of the foundations. SME, understand the business. It's foundational because what happens is, I said, they've been working on it for 5 years with IBM, with MIT,
Yeah.
and they didn't succeed. Okay, because beyond luck, I do have a talent for algorithms. Okay, why? Because I understand the people.
Yeah.
Why do I understand the people? Because they trust me. They tell me everything they know, and I just put them in there, and I have these superpower workers and thinkers in my systems. So what it does, it was written. So I refused. I said, either these 5 people, you keep them, or I'm leaving right now. I don't care. I know you're offering me a lot of money, and I'm having financial
Very interesting.
problems. As I'm talking to you, I have financial problems. I have a lot of debt because I've taken a lot of risks and all that, and I have a mortgage and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
I'd
right.
rather leave than hurt someone. So they're
Well, I
looking at
think that is very strong because I hear so many stories nowadays about responsible AI as well, but there are not many people practicing it like what you're doing here, where you're taking a personal risk because you are saying, hey, if you're not comfortable with this contract where you're not able to fire these people, then I'm leaving, which not a lot of
course.
people would do. I think
Yeah,
that's pretty
I
nice.
even
Yeah.
show my car keys. So
Right.
yeah, but what is that's you're seeing this as a short term. What's the long term effect? Trust.
Mm, trust.
Because these CEOs, they know each other.
But that's a big thing that could be really interesting and important for future engineers as well, because that means that maybe trust is still quite future proof. Like if you have a reputation as a person, it's difficult to fake that. I mean, everyone can claim that they're an AI expert, but if you've got people that
The
need
word
serious
gets around.
expertise,
The
yeah,
word
the
gets
word gets
around.
around. Yeah.
If you call Rothman in, he'll come in with his ideas and his creativity. He won't
Mm,
charge much. He's not going to charge you much. And you can trust him. You really can trust him with anything you say. He'll never repeat it and everything. 20 years later, the system was still running
there we go.
because every time there was something, and it became so automatic, and the people just loved me because I said, I'm not replacing anyone. And I made sure that everyone would have to check the data. No one was fired. I have companies like that that increased their sales 5 times with the same personnel, but no one was ever fired. So
Yeah.
that gives you a very strong reputation. So SME, trust, and then don't go to the competition. Like I would work like for Air France,
Mm,
and I had all the airplanes. In fact, right out of my window here, at one point, I had like 3 or 4 corporations, private jets and Air France, I could recognize the airplane when they would fly over, and I say, that's probably this one and that one. I was maintaining about 50% of anything that was flying over your head. But I didn't go to the competition. Say, why don't you go to Boeing? I said, why would I go to Boeing? It's your competitor. Why would I? You have the Boeing airplanes, but why would I go see Delta? Why would I go? I don't want to do that. But you're losing a lot of money. I don't care. I don't need that money. If I have a small business
Exactly.
and I don't want to scale, that's another thing. SME, trust, a small business. I don't need to scale because I have so much, the demand exceeds my offers. So I'm always trying to deliver.
Plus, I mean, apart from the monetary side of things, I think that approach is also a lot more interesting from just an intellectual perspective and learning new industries. Because if you say that you're not going to work with competitors, then eventually, you move from an airline industry to something like indeed the clothing industry, right? Like the manufacturing of that, and then you can work in a completely different context again.
Yeah, you're thinking right. Because what happened to me is I went from building uh, big airplanes all the way down to the people that manufactured the plastic. You get the whole supply chain,
Mm,
the whole value chain. Yeah, why don't you go see the supplier because he's not delivering to it? Why don't you go see him? Why don't you? And then when you go see the supplier, well, it's not my. Remember the event and the constraint. Why don't you see the lower constraint? So I would go all the way down 5 levels from the top level. I could live like 200 years like that. And so you see the cognitive part, the SME, but multiplied by companies. Trust, do not replace people. You can displace them in the company. I said,
mm.
what's the new job of this person? And I make sure that this person gets another job in the company in the same location where you have to travel 100 miles to go to work. So, and that builds incredible trust with the users because you need the users. You can't replace users like that. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and all of a sudden, I call the users in, and it hits me. You can't replace them. You can't replace them
Mm.
because they weren't going to fire them because I wouldn't be working for 10 years for them. They were just
Yeah.
going to give them another job somewhere. And I said, listen, the 6 months here off the table. And everyone was there. So we need to go call the manager. There's a problem. They were all white and they came in.
Yeah.
It said, and the manager comes in and says, okay, I know I've been working with Dennis for 10 years, so just listen to him, okay? He knows what he's talking about. I said there's a lot of information, and this goes for your AG. This explains why AGI will never exist. I said, I just realized that there's a lot of information that is not in the system. And that information is critical. There's been like snow on the road, and the truck is 15 minutes late, but you've prepared all that work for the
Yep.
truck. What do we do with that? They have tricks. This person is sick, so it's replaced by a temporary person that's not
And
going
that's
to.
like always these detailed little bits of information that are in that company only.
You
Like,
add it up.
yeah,
You add
it
it up.
adds up to a lot of context. That's that
It's called.
specific
I call it
context
the
as
sum
well.
of exceptions. It's a sum
Right,
of all
some of
the little
exceptions. That's a
exceptions,
nice one. Yeah.
and you can do a probability multiplication, and at the end you reach zero.
Yeah, because and so it doesn't matter if you have like the best, smartest AI model that you put in front of that. If
I
you
had
don't,
the best. I had the best,
you
smartest
know,
AI model. I had it. It was there. It was the best. It worked exactly. I said, no, no, no. This person, and then you replace it by an ADG, an automatic thing. There's a lot of other, but that thing sometimes goes wrong. So how are we going to do it? Because not everyone's Amazon. Not
no,
everyone
right, right.
can standardize everything. If you have boxes of matches and stuff like Amazon standard, but a lot of products are not standard. So I said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a screen and we're keeping all the planners where they are. And they said, what's going to happen? I said, I'm going to suggest a schedule, very complex schedule, but they're going to modify it with their real life data that is not in the system. And then the planners were saying, yeah, okay, yeah, but you're going to get a bonus because now I'm going to display the ROI in real time. How much money are you making the company earn in real time? How much did that money? What did that say?
Which is
And you're
probably more if they make use of the system. because it
Yeah,
gets to be more
but
efficient.
but now they're getting crazy. It's like a video game. So I'm saying, and you're going to get a bonus every month.
Yeah.
And the CEO says, "Yeah, I don't care. Earning €1 million, I don't care if you give them €1,000." But I won't give them that much. They'll get and it increase their salary maybe by 10, 15, 20% every month.
Which is
So
great for these people. And I think
they get like crazy using it. So
it's so interesting because like I feel like a couple of years ago there was a much more I guess like more sane attitude towards indeed just making employees more productive. And now you see a lot of companies that are just trying to replace workers outright with AI. But if I hear something like this story, it just makes more sense to just scale your
now
existing
the
workforce,
truth
right?
is you can replace people. But I chose never in my life to accept a project to do that.
And so the great part there is, I think, to wrap all the way back to what you said at the beginning, this is also the cognitive science kind of coming back because trust and bonding is something that humans have done for thousands of years, and that's going to keep being relevant.
Same thing. You go if you go to Morocco and you go to a traditional corporation, the first thing they'll do is want to know you.
Right.
You will not do business even in China, but you won't do business
I've
until you.
heard them. Yeah.
Yeah, I worked a lot with them. So in Asia, you first talk to them. So if I sum up this story, because I'm reaching the end of your the
Yeah, of
podcast,
course.
people, I would if I wrap it up and say first, cognitive science, why to understand how people are and think, and emotional intelligence involved, how they are, who they are, why are they like that, why do they think like that. Then you get to the SME,
Hmm.
then you get to the SME. I want to learn how you work and I want to put it in my Pinecone or any vector store. I'll put the knowledge there, cleanly put, and I'll put instructions. Do this, do that. If your support, say hello, look at your, I'll put the whole, I'll write everything you do down in those two branches of my system.
Hmm.
Okay. And we'll just work on that. And once we've done that, we're going to now automate. What are we going to automate? We refuse to automate someone that will not keep his job, even if he is displaced in a reasonable uh, location where he accepts. If the person says, okay, I don't mind, I'll go to that job. If not, do not accept.
Yep.
Do not accept it. Lose the money because you're building a life of reputation, of image. You're building your brand image. So now you know that people trust you because you have all these references behind you. You say, oh, we can trust him because all these companies we phone say, oh, you can work with him. He's not being charged a lot of stuff. He'll do that. He'll work days and nights to deliver. Okay, now you built the now you can get the generative AI working, the context engine. It's traceable. So every time there's something we don't like, we'll go and change the instructions and exactly like we
Yeah.
want. It's a glass box. It's not a black box. It's glass. And then you say, we need a bonus. The more you put in the company, the more you need to get. And eventually sees it, yeah, and I'm going to keep him. I just won't hire more people as I grow. That's something we can't avoid.
Yeah, but
I,
that's fine in the sense of
we
at least
can't we
people don't
can't
get
help
fired,
that.
right?
We can't.
Yeah.
I've seen companies begin with like 10 people in a department, and after like 15 years, they multiplied their sales by 15, 20, and they still have these 10 people, but working with automate. But we didn't hurt anyone. We don't
Yeah.
want to hurt. We don't want to
Yeah.
hurt. If you hurt someone, it's a scar that will dirty your soul, and that will the first time you meet someone to sell, the CEO sees that. A CEO,
Right.
it's in my last the other book, Business Generative. Look, read the last chapter. I say you have 7 minutes with a CEO. That's my experience. 7 minutes, and those 7 minutes, he's not listening to what you're saying. He's listening to who you are.
I think
That's
that's
how it.
very strong. Yeah.
Well, that's how a CEO works. He doesn't listen to your BS. Okay, he says, okay, I know where he comes from. I have all these references. Who is he? Can I trust him? That's all the
Mhm.
CEO is looking for. Can I trust him? And is it profitable? Can I trust him? Is it profitable? If I trust him, then and it's profitable, we can do it. If one of those things don't work, he's out of my office in 7 minutes, sometimes two. And
Yeah,
a CEO will
that's
tell you that. Okay, I
yeah.
have 5 minutes. I don't know how you got here. I'm giving you 5 minutes.
You get
Trust,
pitch.
profitability. And I'll tell you something. It vibrates. If you spent your life doing what I just said, as soon as you enter, the way you talk, the way, like, I just remember in a big distribution center, a very big mall, and this one of these managers saw me just walking. I'm just consuming, and he said, "You know something? Hello, I want to ask you something.
Mm.
You always look, you always say hello to me, and you always say hello to the sales period. Why do you do that?" This is that I like people. I said, "Yeah, but makes me feel good." So what I mean? So that's the last little thing, the little trick. Trust, profitability, and the CEO feels better.
Right, right, right. And I think out of everything, what surprised me most about this conversation in particular is that we didn't even talk that much necessarily about coding or Python. And I think that a lot of people, when they think about AI solutions that really get into production, that are really successful, they might think it's all about the tech. And of course, it's part of that, right? But indeed, like, this is not how you can differentiate yourself anymore.
So if you talk code, you're gone.
Yeah.
If you talk process, you're there. Okay. And most of my books spend a lot of time on process, and the code is almost generated automatically. Why? What? So the engineer needs to evolve and rapidly. Otherwise, he's going to be replaced
But I
because you
think
don't need.
that this story is super clear, and the pain that people feel and the problems that they have and the way that you can solve them, that will still remain. But you need to become that subject matter expert, as you said before, to be able to
Like
do
the
that, right?
subject matter expert of transformers. You can just, if people are listening to this conversation, the real added value is anything except coding, because they can get everything in my books or any other book. They
Yeah,
can go
of
to
course.
YouTube, they can buy any book. They don't need to buy my book, they can buy hundreds of books, but they're never going to get this conversation.
Yeah, and the thing is there as well with trust, you can upskill your technical ability quite quickly, but trust, it takes time to build, right? Like, you can't force suddenly CEOs to trust you in 10 days. As you say, it takes years. So I think with that last example with your GitHub as well, if you have a GitHub portfolio, that code on its own is actually not worth that much. It's only worth a lot if you have that story of trust and the subject matter expertise, because indeed, anyone now can generate a code repository in 5 minutes, right? But it's
Yeah,
only
yeah.
worth something if you have that expert story to back up what you're actually doing.
Look at all the advertisements today. You live in Netherlands, so we see the same advertisements. Look at the car advertisements. They're not selling you the tech, they're selling you a story. A
Exactly.
woman, a family, a person. They're selling you a story. Look at the Airbnb advertisement. It's always a story.
Mm.
Look at any advertisement today, the story, the people. They're giving you the people, because people, that's how you relate to people. You think, oh, the E Mercedes is this because you have this. No, you get in the E
Doesn't
Mercedes,
matter.
you're going off to space, or you show the desert, the Western United States. Wow, look how far you can go.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
story matters a lot. And then the person will say, wow, Mercedes is cool. Maybe I should go try one. What do you see? A story. But everyone knows that Mercedes is a fantastic brand as it
Mm.
is. Anyone that looks at my LinkedIn profile before I begin to speak knows who I am. So I don't need to explain that. I need to
Yeah.
explain how I got there, which is this conversation.
That is very, 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 very useful for, I think, even the people that are currently university, but also I think people who've been software engineers for 10 years who indeed need to future proof themselves. So that was 40 years of Dennis's real AI experience all in one interview. No hype and no shortcuts. If you want to follow a similar path to Dennis, grab the Future Proof AI Engineer Roadmap in the description below. In addition, check out Dennis's book recommendations to become a high paid AI engineer.